Hi, I'm Stephen. This is Mick, and today we're going to be talking about inheritance. Before we begin, though, we just want to say that this is only a discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. These are just our thoughts and opinions, which can and will change. Neither of us are experts on anything. We are just two dudes talking. All right, Mick, we've already discussed this topic a little bit before realizing that we forgot to hit record on one of the devices. So we're kind of starting again, but we're going to kind of push on and try not to retread old ground. It's gonna be better this time around. Let's once again, though, just say that the impetus for this conversation was that we were thinking, okay, what is the role of generations? And meaning from that, I guess, parent to child. Is that fair? Is that kind of where we were coming from?
Yeah, I think so. It was. I think the initial concept that I was thinking about is, how do we slingshot the younger generation? How does the older generation slingshot the younger generation by what it passes on?
Yeah, so maybe then, just to go back a little bit, is why do you think that is what the role of a parent to a child is? Why do you think the parent has some sort of owing to the child to help them get up to speed and then surpass them?
It's a good question. I guess from my point of view, humans, it's a survival technique. At the end of the day, I think it's a survival technique. So I would say, out of all, we're not a predator. We're not a lion. It's not something we can physically confront a big animal and beat it hands on one. So I guess as humans, we're quite weak in that physical sense. But what maybe pulls us apart is makes us different is that we have the ability to think and create and to be able to create strategies and all the rest of it. So going back to the lion, you'd create a tribe that would be able to strategically take that lion down, maybe trap it in some way or something like that. So from my point of view, at a really fundamental level, the idea that the older generation passes something on to its younger generation is out of survival.
I want to tell a little bit of a story of kind of my thinking when I first started or first had a thought regarding, okay, well, what is the actual role of a parent? And it came from a selfish place, which is quite interesting. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I was thinking one day, I'm like, looking back at where I was when I was a child to where I am now, how much I've learned, how much I've grown, how much more I understand about the world, how much more I understand about myself. And then thinking, of course, well, one day I'm going to pass and all that knowledge is just going to go back into wherever it came from. And so I was thinking, God, it'd be good if I was able to pass that on to myself as a child, like all that knowledge, so I didn't have to take that long time to get to this point that I'm at now. But obviously we can't go back in time, and I'm not one to try and break the rules of nature and figure out a way to go back in time and tell myself that. So I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could teach someone young who is at a younger age what I know now and get them up to speed, get them up to where I am now faster than I got there so that they can then progress and get further to me, which is kind of the same as what you're talking about with that whole slingshotting thing. And that's where I was like, well, isn't that then kind of what the purpose of having children is to get them up to where is to, if you think about it selfishly, it's like, what are we apart from our experiences? Like, yes, we have a body, organs, and everything, possibly a soul, depends what you believe and how you perceive things. But if you think about who we are is actually just a summation of all of the experiences we've had in life. If you can pass that on to someone else who will outlive us physically, then you kind of are still surviving, and then they can also carry that on and progress it further. So it's kind of like, if you think about your lineage, that's what's happened. You've had your great whatever grandfather, grandmother had experiences, they passed it down, and then their experiences are living on throughout the children. So I'll pause there for a second. Is there anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought of it from that point of view, I guess. So let me get this right. Let me sort of feed it back and see if I understand. So the desire So initially you have the desire of like you got to this age and you're like, imagine if I had all this knowledge when I was younger, how much better positioned I would be than I am now. And so knowing that you can't do that, the second best option is, okay, if I had a kid, then I can give it to them and I can see the benefit of the knowledge that I've gained through them as they go forward in life, because they've got that knowledge at an earlier age than you will be able to get it. And so the selfish part is wanting to pass that on and seeing. So you're sort of saying that as you pass that knowledge on, that's you living on because that's the knowledge which you gained. That's a really interesting way to think of it, because I see whatever knowledge I've gained is a collective of those prior to me. So I don't necessarily, I'm not sure if, I can definitely see why people have kids. And it explains probably a few things about how kids are sometimes raised. So you imagine a father or a mum that wants their kid to be, I'm just going to use something random here, that wants to be elite at sport because they might be 30 or 40 years old and they go, oh, if I knew this when I was younger, if I knew the desire to have sport or I was able to put myself in this position, then I would have lived a much better life. And so knowing that they can't do that, if they have kids, they sometimes might fall into a situation where they live through that kid. And the kid's not able to, kids sort of constrained in what they wanted to do. So it makes complete sense from that point of view that people do that. I would think so.
There's a saying, I can't remember it exactly, but it's like you die twice. The first time is when they put you in the grave, and the second time is the last time anyone says your name. So it's kind of a similar thing where it's like you've got two beings, two versions of yourself, which would be your physical body. That's an obvious death. And then you've got some other entity that is you, that is pretty much your experiences, or they're saying it's your name. But to me, a name is just a shorthand for the amount of experiences or the whole of the experiences that a person has had.
Yeah, that makes you realize, that opens up some really interesting questions or discussion around, like you imagine someone like Newton or Galileo Galilei. Did they have a desire to pass on that knowledge from the same kind of perspective that you're sort of discussing? Did they see that this was the way in which they could contribute to life and they wanted to see that carried on? And that's what was the desire to push through everything. So I think Galileo ended up getting locked up and considered mentally ill, but still there was a desire to persist with his stand on what he knew about the world and to push that through. And I guess it might have been a couple of centuries later in which that was actually come to fruition. So in his situation, he's lived on, we still talk about these people. So he's lived on for much longer than his physical body. I wonder why people desire that then. Have you thought about why? So do you think that the desire is because obviously every living creature, I would assume their goal is to survive as long as possible, and maybe in some sort of mental or psychological way, that's surviving as long as possible, even though you're not physically present. And maybe that's the desire to do what you were saying to do. Why do you think that desire is?
It's a good question. It's actually a little bit different to that for me. I don't know. I've hit a point where I kind of the desire to live forever or to survive forever. I'm kind of like, no, I'm good. Whatever time I get, I'm happy with that. I don't need to. I don't want to live forever. I don't need my name to last forever. But what I do care about is, and I care about this in a general sense, is I hate waste. And I feel like, okay, everything I've been through, everything I've experienced, I've gained something there. And if that doesn't get passed on to someone, I feel that is wasteful. Like, I don't care if they forget who I am after knowing all that stuff. I just feel like I don't want all these experiences to go to waste. I want them to help benefit someone else, or more than some individual,
Yeah, so the question then becomes, where does it so when you pass on that knowledge, one question I then have is, where does the person lose the experience? And so that is wasteful in itself. So I understand what you're saying is to be as efficient as possible, we should pass on the knowledge that we currently know. So previous generations make better decisions about the environment in which they live. But then if you take the opposite, I'm a little bit different in the fact that I agree with you. I have that finite idea as well. I'm happy to, pass away. If I make it to 80, that's great. If I make it past 80, I think it's going to be a hard run. And so to me, I see life as like a story. It's kind of like going on a roller coaster ride. And there's so much anticipation when you first go on that roller coaster ride. There's so much excitement, and then when you get to the end of the roller coaster ride, you just want to maybe get off. You've had your run, but all through that roller coaster ride, you've had this ups and down experiences, and really that's kind of what you take to the grave. And so it's maybe this could be seen as selfish in the opposite point of view. Whether my knowledge gets passed on or not is not of a great deal of concern to me. And I can't maybe explain why that is the case. But yeah, I'm not sure that I have that same desire to see, my knowledge live on. And whether that's me not worrying about. So another idea came up when we were talking about that is maybe the desire to pass that knowledge on and see the generation ahead of you do better is that collectively as a species, we want to survive. So rather than the individual and thinking about your own life and how long you survive, you think about the species, and therefore you actually do things for others to survive. So you will make steps. Like if you think about people that go to war to fight for freedom, that's what they're doing. They're sacrificing their own life in order for their culture to survive. I personally, I've never felt that, but I understand why people do feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'll make clear, just in case, because it sounds like maybe you took it a little bit differently, is when I say I want to pass that on to someone, I'm not just specifically talking about my own child. I'm talking about anyone who will hear, anyone who wants to hear, and I'm not trying to force it on anyone either. It's just like, I feel like I've gained a lot of experiences. I want to put it out there so it's available so that someone else can learn from it and can, like I said, develop quicker than I did and then surpass whatever I got to. And I say that because I want to lead to, well, you for work, I won't get too deep into it, but you build like training simulations. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yes. Yeah.
What are you doing when you're building those training simulations?
I'm trying to improve people's understanding of the topic.
Yeah, you're passing on experience that maybe not you have gained, but someone else has gained, and partly there's always a part of you in the development of it. So is that different to what I'm saying I want to do in passing on the experiences that I've had?
No, you're right. If you take away what you were saying before, is if it was that direct relationship with a child of yours or a family relative of some sort, if you take that away, you're right. Yeah, the desire for each individual to add something to the overall improvement of society is definitely it feels like, for me, it does feel like a biological goal. It's like we're driven to do that, and we don't actually fully understand why we're driven to do that, except from having the explanation that it is trying to make our species or us survive longer and be fitter for it. Like if we go back to the fitness description, be fitter for their environment. Yeah.
Yeah, the fitness description, which we talked about before we actually hit record, but that's all right. Let's leave that in the past. Where was I going to go with that?
So maybe before we do that, it's just a simple one-liner. When we say fitness, we say the living creature is best suited to its environment.
Yes. So, quick recap: environment is everything around us that isn't part of us. So if we want to think about it in physical terms, our body is probably the barrier, and then everything outside of it, everything that we sense, is part of our environment. So again, you are part of my environment. I am part of your environment. So it depends on your perspective as well as to what your environment is. And then fitness, like you just said, is that it's optimized for whatever that environment is. What I was going to say about what we were talking about there is a perspective that I have on the world, and I think there's something biological, like you said, that we are driven to communicate our own understanding of, I call it reality or natural laws. And I think this happens across all different mediums. When I look at like an art piece that speaks to me, it's because someone has had experiences that has told them something about the nature of reality, told them about natural laws, and they want to communicate that. And so the way that they've communicated that is through some artistic medium. Say they've done a painting. And this is why I think it's really difficult to also explain why something is beautiful to you, because you're looking at it in the medium of painting. You're not looking at it in the medium of words that we can communicate. And so when you look at it, you're like, that's beautiful, but I can't quite put into words why it is beautiful. I think if you get to really generalizing why it's beautiful, it's because it tells you, or you've glimpsed something about reality in that. And that gives us this feeling of beauty.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the time, for instance, truth is a topic in its own, but there's some kind of general understanding. You see that with music as well. So I think any time in which we convey something from one to another is considered, I guess, language. But language can come verbal, it can come written, it can come, like you said, visual, sound, all the rest of it. I mean, yeah, there's tunes that they know people that a generalized audience would actually dance to, but the explanation of why they dance to that is not fully understood, I think. And so, yeah, that's true. There's something of beauty, there's something of greater understanding, but we can't always explain it. Um, and I think, I think the biological desire to me is that the way in which we evolve and strategize and communicate to each other is our greatest strength. It's like a defensive mechanism. So if you think about like a cheetah, a cheetah is really quick. You know, that's its kind of a defensive or it's or attacking mechanism. So humans, don't have that physical strength that other animals have. But I do think that our strength is actually the ability to communicate and the ability to think deeply and think forward ahead of time and all the rest of it. And that's kind of, I guess, what the importance of sharing that knowledge actually is. When we communicate, it's our way to set ourselves up that we can survive because we're defenseless in other areas.
Yeah. And back to, like I said, why I think we see beauty in understanding the nature of reality is that once you understand how something works, that's how you can use it. You can manipulate it. You can use it to survive. So, for example, like look at the lights around us. If we didn't understand how electricity worked, we wouldn't be able to create those lights. Like there's certain bits of knowledge that you need to know about how atoms interact with one another in order to make effective use of it.
Yes.
All right, where was I going? I want to go back to, my thought process. So where was I up to? I wanted to pass on experiences to, say, a child. I'm like, so how would you do that? Well, when I think about it, it's like, well, just tell them, just talk to them, tell them this is right, this is wrong, do this, don't do that. And then I pause for a second. I'm like, that sounds familiar. It sounds like exactly what my parents did for me. Did that hasten my development into where I am currently? Maybe to a degree, but not like as powerful as or as quickly as I wanted it to happen. So I'm like, okay, so just telling someone what you've learned, what you've experienced, that doesn't work. It's not as effective as I think it could be. So then what's the next step? Okay, well, for me, how did I learn these lessons? How did I understand and realize them? I experienced them. I'm like, okay, well, then that means if I want to teach a child or someone younger than me or the next generation, and I want them to grow quicker than I did, then they should experience these things earlier, faster, more often than I did.
Yeah, that makes it. That makes a lot of sense. So I think that removes one of the tricks. I guess as a parent, you often it must be hard because even as someone older, you can see a mistake about to happen because you've gone through experiences before, and the ability to express to someone that experience, but then hold back that you don't constrain them to undergo their own experience and failures is where the line is. So I think in your case, what you're sort of suggesting is that you could pass on the knowledge, but there is no expectation that it will be taken on board. But if it is taken on board, then they might get ahead because they know knowledge that you didn't know when you were at that age, I guess.
Well, I think about it like this. Anytime someone has told me something, anytime I've been in a class or something, or someone has just, okay, this is dry. This is what you need to know. This is how it works. This is maths. This is science, whatever it is. There's only a certain amount of that I remember, and it has very little influence on how I make my actions. Like there's very little tangible to it other than someone has told me. It makes me aware of something, but it doesn't really make me understand how, like, the implication of going with it or going against it. It's not until you actually do something and experience it with all your senses that you realize, that is what it feels like. That is what it feels like to touch something hot. That is what it feels like to fall off something high. That is why I want to avoid it. So if someone just tells you something, you've got an awareness of it, but it's got very little influence over your actions. So you'll look at jumping off a roof into a pool and you're like, yeah, that looks safe. Oh, that's good. Like there's no way this could go wrong. But then you might do it and you might experience it and you might miss the pool. And then you're like, oh, wow, there's actually greater danger to it. And so now you are aware of it at a much deeper level. Your whole body is aware of it. So next time you are in a situation and you need to make a decision where that is a factor, you're going to remember that. You're going to remember that experience, and it's going to inform your decision making a lot more than if someone just told you, don't jump off of a roof into a pool.
Yes. And I would say you can still speed up the evolution process after the person's had the experience that you wanted to prevent them from. Because at that point in time, they've got the questions and their mindset's open enough to take the knowledge actually in. So I think I sometimes fit in this category. If I sit in a lecture first to be taught something, it kind of goes over my head. I don't absorb it because there's no relative position for me. So there's a lot of questions in my mind. And when there's a lot of questions that I can't ask or get answers to, then the more knowledge they're giving, the more it breaks down for me, because it's like, hang on, I haven't answered this question. You're just stacking more knowledge on top, and I need to resolve this fundamentally first. So for me, often it's like, okay, here's the topic. And I like, okay, just leave me alone for a bit. Let me think about it and play with it from my own intuition. And then after that point, then allow me to come and ask those questions. And then I get that knowledge. And I think for me, that's a rapid way in which I can learn. Now, if I don't have someone to turn to after the point of failure, then I have to figure out that failure, what failed myself. And that might be it might be short, but it might be a very long trial and error process. At that point, if someone comes in with the experience and explains, these are the factors, and I've actually gone through it tangibly, I can reflect and go, yeah, you're right, actually. Thinking back to my own experience, that's what I observed as well. And it was only you that was able to talk to me about this that allowed me to think of it from that perspective. So even though you go through the experience of the failings yourself, you can still evolve at a greater rate than maybe the older generation relative to you, I guess.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's more of, okay, how do you best teach someone something? And I think I do agree with you there, where it's like you got to have that little bit of exposure to it. And then it's like instead of you spending the tens of hours figuring out why that went wrong, someone comes in and goes, this is why it went wrong. I've spent those tens of hours. This is why. And I think maybe that could be then where the role of generations comes in. You are the older generation who has put in those tens, hundreds of hours, comes in at that point that they've had that enough stimulus that they're like, okay, now I'm interested in this. Now I want to know the answers. It's like, well, here are the answers, so you don't have to spend those hours.
Yeah, correct. I mean, ideally, as a parent, I think this line is what you want to try and straddle, isn't it? You know, so you want to stop your kid from doing things that's going to be detrimental to itself, whether it's going to be breaking a leg or being hit by a car, whatever it is. You're trying to set up those where they no-go zones, I guess. But there's areas in which you know that they're going to make a mistake, they're going to fail, but you want them to go through that experience themselves, and then your role is to then support them after those failures. It's to, I guess, as an ideal parent, you give as much experience to your kid as it can cope with comfortably, or somewhat comfortably, or a little bit discomforting, but as much experience as possible. And then through the failures, you want to support them after those failures. And where you can, when we talk about the support, maybe it's just emotional support, but in other areas it might be support of knowledge. So it's like, okay, the kids failed. Okay, now they're ready to take to the knowledge because they've actually had the experience, which is something that's is important for them to be able to understand that knowledge, which I'm going to present to them.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part of parenting. I mean, I agree with all that you just said there. Most of, I won't say all because I don't know. I'd have to go over it with a fine tooth comb to say all. But yeah, that's got to be the hard part, is like, that they have to experience, again, going back to last time with pain and discomfort, they have to experience a certain level of discomfort for optimal growth, optimal learning. And then it's going to be difficult to them because you've been through it before, but you have to kind of have that bigger picture where it's like, it's better that let's say they touch a hot mug than put their hand in boiling water. Like, it's better that they have a small scale experience that gives them kind of an idea about where this leads to if you go more intense, and then you fill them in with the rest of the information. And that's kind of how I look at it. And a concept I want to actually ask you about, because this is something I've been thinking about and working on. So this concept, I'm kind of loosely calling it levels of awareness. So the first level of awareness I call knowledge, and that's where it's like going back to someone tells you something. Okay, I can't think of an example. They tell you, let's stick with the hot one actually. They tell you, don't touch that mug, it's hot, it'll hurt. And you've got this, don't touch it, it's hot, whatever. But you haven't felt what that feels like, that pain of being hurt by something that's hot. So the next level of awareness I call understanding, where you've got an experience of that. So maybe you touch the mug and you're like, that is hot. And then from that you can extrapolate to, okay, that was hot, that hurt. If I grab something that's really hot, that might do serious damage to me. Like, this was just small scale, it'll recover. It did recover. But if I go full scale, that will really injure me. And then the next level of awareness, which is like full awareness of something, is I call realizing, which is like, you've had that experience. So maybe then you put your hand in boiling water and it burns and it scars and you get third degree burns, and then you're stuck with that for life. It's like, you've realized that now, you've learned that lesson, you're not going to do it again. But you could have stopped at any point along the way. Like, the message was there the whole time. Someone told you about it. You had a small scale experience, and now you've had a full scale experience. And if you don't learn from that, well, good luck. So that's kind of, what do you think of that concept of that? There's like 3 different levels of awareness for anything in life.
Yeah, I think that's a good concept, and that it shows the importance of being transparent and truthful through that process as well. So, if you imagine that process of someone being hurt by boiling water, at some point you basically tell them, it's hot, don't touch it. Some people are going to be curious enough to go touch it and then figure out that it's actually hot, and then extrapolate, like you said, that what it would mean if you put your whole hand in a boiling saucepan or something like that. So I guess, this is where I think drugs would be an interesting one as teenagers. So often parents want to turn them completely away from drugs. And what's fascinating is those parents that actually did drugs when they were teenagers, some of those parents don't want to divulge that to their kids, in the risk that they will make the same mistakes. But if you don't divulge that information, then you risk them making the same mistakes as well, because they don't actually understand where you got the knowledge from. And then, it's being confident enough to express it, to say, look, this is my experience. This is what I know about it. Do it at your own peril. I'm warning you that it could lead to something detrimental to you. But then actually preventing people from doing it is where it comes a little bit difficult, because if they don't listen to your warning, and they go do it, then that's really onus on them. But what you've set yourself up for in the future is they'll pay more attention to you in the future because they realize that you actually did have the experience and you were truthful and transparent about it, and that what you said actually come to fruition. The mistake, I think, like I use the drug one because it's a good classic mistake. The mistake might be that, oh, don't take drugs, that makes you crazy or something. And then when the person actually takes the drug and don't go crazy, then why would they listen to the parent again? Because in that case, the parent wasn't, maybe had that experience, didn't want to divulge the information, wasn't transparent. And so therefore, they're breaking that process of evolution, I feel. And then, the person's going to come back and think that their information is not reliable. So it's important, I guess, looking at those learning steps, if you're an observer of someone going through those steps, is the best I think that you can do is just be transparent and be as honest as possible. And that sets the other person up as best that you can almost.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're hardly going to listen to you if they know you haven't had that experience yourself. I think this is one of the things that makes people credible is knowing, okay, they've been through the same thing. So maybe you have, again, that small scale experience of whatever they've been through. And then you can say, okay, I think I've got an idea about where this leads. And then they come in, look, I've put in the X amount of hours to learn the lesson, to fully realize it. So I'm trying to help you now. And I'm trying to tell you that, look, this is where it leads. It's still, and another point there is to treat them as, or to give them agency, to allow them to say, okay, this is your decision, but I'm just telling you this is where it leads. I think you've had enough experience with it that you understand enough, you felt it enough that you can extrapolate yourself and see that, yes, this is in fact where it will go. And the other thing to keep in mind with that is a lot of the times we forget that our experiences are different to someone else's. What we've been through in life is different to someone else. So when we try to shortcut, okay, just don't do drugs, for example, they haven't seen all the steps that got you to, okay, this is the this is what you can broadly apply. They haven't seen that, okay, I did this, which led to this, which led to this, which led to this, which I finally realized this was the reason that that all happened. So just cut it here.
Yeah. And also, as someone that I think that you pass on knowledge, you got to be also self-aware that, like you said, I guess over time the environment changes as well. You think about social media today and the digital era compared to people, 40 years ago or something like that. How does the knowledge apply in its current environment? So sometimes, I guess what we were saying before is, fitness describes how well you are suited to that environment. Evolution is the ability to pass on knowledge in order to be better fitted for the environment. But what happens if that environment changes over time and your knowledge becomes obsolete? How does that then pass on to the next generation? So I think that's where you got to be careful about how forceful you are with your knowledge. I mean, if we go back to the parent-child relationship, yeah, of course, we don't want kids running out on roads. We don't want them harming themselves. But at some point, that kid's going to grow up and become an adult. And, once they're starting to become an adult, all you can do is give them your experiences and realize they might make some different decisions better than you because they've grown up in a different environment in which they learnt within. So some of your knowledge actually applies and some of it doesn't, and it needs to change, and you might be wrong too. So I think there's a careful balance between the prior generation providing knowledge and then the younger generation actually finding new knowledge or exploring new knowledge, and where that transition actually happens.
I'm glad you brought that up because this is kind of where I wanted to go next. In that, okay, we've kind of established or agreed that slingshotting, as we're terming it, is kind of what we want as the role of generations, is to get the previous generation up to speed faster than we are and allow them to progress further. The reason that I think, well, personally, I mean, you can tell me how you feel about it. The reason I believe that is important is because our environment has changed so much. And this goes back to evolution. It's like biologically, we evolve for our to be fit for our environment, but that takes long periods of times, happens very slowly, where our environment is actually changing so much faster than biological evolution can catch up, which is where it gets into cultural evolution, where it's like, okay, we are adaptable, we can update our software, we can say, okay, this is how we interface with the world. So it's like you're born, you have this set of ideas, understandings, instincts of how to interact with the environment around you. Those instincts were made for an environment that existed thousands of years ago. So now the role of the parent is to update that as fast as possible. And it is a matter of survival, because think about how powerful some of the tools that we have now. Like, speaking of tools, imagine like a drill, right? Imagine how powerful that thing is. Where would you come across something that powerful thousands of years ago that a kid could get their hand on, pull the trigger, and do damage themselves? You know, it's not in their hardwiring to understand that this little tool can do a lot of damage. And so that's why I think, the environment's changed, and that's why it's really important for us to get them up to speed really quick in order to, first off, survive, but then the next part is to thrive and go past us.
Yeah, I think that analogy of the hardware software works really well here. Is hardware is what you're constrained with, what you're physically born with, and then obviously the software is updating, I guess, all the time based on its environment. And yeah, some things become obsolete. Like I think I often think about this a lot, like how blacksmith or other similar trades or old techniques have now become somewhat obsolete. So machinery takes over, and it would be interesting. It would be interesting to try and pick that knowledge up again as well. How long it would actually take to get to the level in which they previously were. So you imagine, blacksmith making chained armor or big swords or big shields, using handmade techniques. Now become obsolete because we've built machines that do the work for us. But if you take someone today and try to get them to the productivity and the craftsmanship with their hands to what they were previously, I think it would take some time. And that's probably because that knowledge has become obsolete and hasn't been passed on to the extent that it once was, I guess. I can imagine like back then it will always be probably a son. So a son starting being a blacksmith at the age of 10 and 12, whereas now that's the starting of high school, which is a whole different level of knowledge. And the motor skills that child would have built by doing that craftsmanship day in, day out as a teenager would be something quite unique if you looked at it today.
Yeah, and another reason I think it's so important for us as a society to think about this, how do we skill our youth to get them up to speed fast enough, is because I look at it and I'm like, the period of learning to interact with the world in an effective way is getting longer and longer. Like you just said there, 12 years old, you'd probably be primary school, high school, whereas there you'd be actually, like historically, you'd be starting a trade at that point. So you've already got all the skills you need to actually survive in the world. Now it's specializing. Whereas nowadays, it's like actually we're in school for much longer just to get us up to speed with, okay, this is everything going on. This is how you survive in the world that we've created. And then, like for myself, I'm like, I'm 30 and I don't even know if I'm fully prepared to, survive and go past where I'm at. I feel like I'm still at the learning phase where there's still more I want to know or need to know about the world in order to effectively operate within it. So it's like, well, we have a finite lifespan and we're not pushing that lifespan out far enough that, the percentage of time we spent getting up to speed is far too great of it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it actually asks a really interesting question, because you start to think about what are the skills that we're passing on to the younger generation and what are they actually doing with it? And I think the explosion of the digital era makes you question, what is the value of what we're doing? If you think about what we did prior, and there can be, if you go back far enough in time, there can probably be really direct outcomes or knowledge or passing of knowledge on that actually show a clear link to why you would survive. So like, going back to tribes, learning how to get berries or to get food and all the rest of it, that knowledge would have been passed down. You eat these, you don't eat these. This is where you find them. This is how you hunt them. Um, and there's a direct relationship survival. That's harder and harder as we go forward. So, like, what is the direct relation of survival of a developer, computer programmer, or what is the survival of maybe a multimedia artist? The connections are less direct. And do we question evolution enough? Like, we evolve, obviously, but it's almost like we evolve intuitively. We don't really think about, maybe we try to some extent think about what is important for us in the future, but it feels at times that we don't have a very good grasp or control of what we're actually learning. Is this going to be beneficial? Even though we can see ourselves evolving and performing better this way, what is its actual tangible benefit to us? And I think that set us in a situation, like you said, is that we're teaching where the learnings, because the knowledge keeps stacking up, and maybe we're not making some of that knowledge obsolete or of no use, then it's almost like we're doing things that really you start to question their value of their outcomes. And when you do that, you take more and more time from an individual to, like you said, maybe catch up to where they think they should be. Yeah.
Yeah, we just keep building on the knowledge, but it's like you said, it's kind of bloating and we don't need it all. Maybe there's like 10% of what we know and understand is what we actually need. And yet we haven't taken the time to clean it up, to, waste it, to say, no, we don't need this anymore. We don't need that. I think one of the things is that I know, like you said, it's kind of obsolete to have some of these skills like blacksmith. But I think it's good to, I think there's a balance, and I think we're too far on the side of we are too disconnected from what we actually need to survive. Like, I think it's dangerous for us to not know, okay, where does our food come from? We go to the supermarket and we buy food. Okay, that's pretty much the extent of the majority of us that know, okay, where does that come from? How does it grow? Like, first of all, yeah, where's it grown? It gets transported. Some of it gets processed. And like, imagine if that stops. Imagine if the supermarket stops. What then? And I think this is kind of something that we don't necessarily consciously think about, but I think it weighs on us subconsciously, is that because we are so disconnected from what we need to survive, there's this angst that, okay, we're very vulnerable now. If something happens to these processes that are far removed from the foundation, it's going to take us a long time to get that foundation back so that we can survive. I don't know. How do you feel about it? Do you feel that there's some kind of angst in that we are too disconnected from things, and that perhaps there's a balance between, okay, we can use the new technology that makes us and allows us to do things faster, better, cheaper, but also we have some awareness and an ability to go back to those old ways just as a safety?
Yeah, I agree. We're very disconnected, I think, as a society. We're very disconnected from the world around us. We're very connected to each other in sometimes a very specific way. I was reading, I'm going to go a little bit of tangent, but I think it's an interesting one because it highlights this problem, I think. So I read an article the other day that, I don't know, it was like $500. It was a weird price, $493 or something like that. And you could get 200 plus items from Amazon, random items. And it was really weird. And I forget what the article was about. It was about basically being able to send those back in bulk or something silly like this. But what really stood out to me in that article, it had a photo of this girl or this lady that bought all these items randomly. And I started to look at the items, and what it signified to me is a lot of those items were purely designed to just get money. And it made me go, what is the benefit of this? Like, it's the same kind of rubbish, like it was ornaments or a table, and you can see them, they don't have real good structure. They're cheap. They'll probably last maybe 6 months or something, then they'll be in the bin. And it just signified how much energy we waste on things that aren't really of great importance to us. And maybe why, what was the motive of that individual to do that? And to me, it signals that they are highly disconnected to the environment around them. I mean, I don't understand why someone would purchase uh, purchase 200 plus random items. I don't know what outcome they desire to have, except maybe some feeling of joy. And yeah, that kind of worries me a little bit in some respect. But to me, it definitely highlights the significant disconnection, because I don't think any behavior like that is valuable to our survival or the environment survival around us. So yeah, I would say I would agree. Yeah, we're highly disconnected, and that makes us make probably decisions, unconscious decisions that don't necessarily set us up to best suit our environment. Like you said, the disconnection of food is a significant one. It's yeah, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on food, because I think yeah, the disconnection of where our food comes from and how it's created is not very well understood. And then when you do understand it, it's kind of like thinking about space. It's too great in its verbal context or in its video, in its format that it's shared with you. It's too great to actually understand as an individual. It's like having a number 1 trillion. What does it actually mean? You can't tangibly connect to that. So yeah, even if we know where our food comes from, the lack of experience of going through that process means that we're not connected to it still.
Yeah, I think tying it back to what is the role of generations, I think tangibly for the next few generations, it is getting that level of awareness up about, okay, these are the things that are actually necessary for your survival. This is what will actually make you feel happy, feel good. Like you said, those 200 ornamental items, what are they actually doing for you? And then if you look at that, what is the trade-off of those 200 ornamental items? Maybe you look at it and it's like, oh, that's nice, that's pretty, it looks good. But then what about the angst that you get because I spent on that, I didn't spend on my garden, I didn't spend securing shelter, I didn't spend all these things that are at the foundation of what we need to survive. I'm operating at a level that is way past what we need to survive, but I don't have a strong stable foundation of how to survive.
Yeah, and even if you get to a point where you can afford all of that and be in abundance, then if you think about, the general idea of what you said before, the desire to contribute to humans' evolution, then what does buying the abundance help solve from that point of view? If you're well adjusted to your environment, wouldn't it make more sense to help other people get more well adjusted to their environment? So yeah, just ignoring that there and then being in more abundance yourself is quite a strange situation if you think about it from an evolutionary point of view and getting the best out of the race, I guess, or the species.
Yeah, I think I like that you said the word abundant, because I think that is when we talk about how much the environment has changed. I feel like we are hardwired for a time where we were in, I don't know what the word would be, deficit, where it was like you got to fight for survival. But now we live in a world of abundance in terms of what we actually need to survive, in terms of having food, shelter, water, security. But those things are slowly going away because we're not focusing on them anymore. So we had this abundant period. Now we're using up those resources and we're not restocking them, and we're focusing on something else, not realizing that, okay, once these things that are gone that we had abundance of, that's going to collapse everything on top of it.
Yeah, I think the word, like the idea of abundance, is actually like a false misconception, I assume. It just really means that we can collect all those resources and store them at will for us, but that comes at a detriment to others. So like if I think about where I'm living at the moment, this house and the houses around it, it came at the cost of the environment that got scraped from here. So whenever we think, oh, we've got an abundance of this, there was always a finite amount of that. It's just that from our perspective, we've got an abundance because we stole it and stored it for ourselves and not for others. So yeah, it's sort of, yeah, I guess, yeah.
It depends on your perspective in that respect. Yeah, there's it's an abundance of what we need to survive. It's not necessarily an abundance of what we need.
Yes, of what we have, because that's the problem that causes the idea that we have abundance causes the depletion of those resources to a point that we don't have an abundance. Because
So, yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
always act as if we are lacking.
yeah. I mean, to some respect, you want to live within the bounds of what you only need, and I think that's self-rewarding. I think if you think about when an individual is at peace with themselves, it's, if you think about all those teachings, it's generally when, it's a minimalist kind of concept, I guess. It's you you're generally at your best selves when you can just accept what you've currently got. The idea that you need more all the time is probably a signal that you're not at peace with yourself, I guess. And there's something unresolved, and that's why you're externalizing it and trying to grab onto things that you don't necessarily need.
It's kind of like this is a bad way of putting it, but I'm struggling to think of a better way of putting it at the moment. It's kind of like, what's your expectation? Is your expectation to continually have more? Okay, well, unless you continually have more, you won't feel satisfied. But if your expectation is, okay, I just need enough to survive, then when you meet that expectation, you get the exact same feeling as if you were constantly chasing more. So why not then say, okay, look at nature. If I just get what I need to survive, that's sustainable. If I expect that I constantly need things to grow, that's unsustainable. Just looking at the world around us. So yeah, it's up to us then. Well, either way, you can get a good feeling. You can get a feeling of peace. But do you want to put that feeling on something that's easy to obtain, easy to manage, or do you want to put that feeling on something that's impossible to attain, impossible to manage?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So something that's easier to maintain is obviously better. And I guess when we think about how we evolve, we don't think that forward. And maybe it's because only now we can actually self-reflect. Technology has come to a point in which we can self-reflect on these things. I think what's changed rapidly is the ability to control our environment at a mass. Like, you think about cultivating and agriculture, where it started and where it is today. I mean, it's amazing some of the machines that farmers actually have to control masses of land. And when you control size like that, it has a detrimental impact. But when you do it on a smaller scale to where you can do it, there's probably a lot of wastage. There's so many things with food. That's a classic example, like the transportation of food, the waste of food, and all the rest of the waste, all that energy. And while it may seem like an evolving, we might seem like we're evolving because we can control it and do it in abundance. What actually is ahead of us is probably a detriment, because we're actually uh, not regulating the environment in which we reside in.
The other thing is, our technology has advanced so much that we're actually using brute force tactics for the majority of things we do. And let me explain this. So think about computers, right? Think about how much more powerful computers have got. Think about how much worse programmers have got. They use it ineffectively. Like, if you are a good programmer, if you understand what's going on very low level, and you optimize the way you code, you can get so much more out of it than the normal programmer, because they don't understand what's going on. And so they're just doing what works. But that doesn't matter in the majority of cases, because the technology we have is so much more advanced that you never have to worry about that problem. But so what's going on in other sectors, like, for example, farming, is that we have these brute force tactics of how we can farm. But what that's doing is actually destroying the environment around us. So why don't we now think, okay, we have so much better technology, so much more capability to mold the environment around us. Why not now look at, okay, how can we optimize the way that we do it using those advanced technologies? And now it may take a little bit more energy to begin with, but once you start working with nature instead of against it, like we are in a lot of circumstances, you don't have to consistently be putting that power in. Nature will start to take over, and it'll just run itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that leads into, to me, that leads into the role of evolution, and the role of the slingshotting the next generation is to realize. So it's not also about what we did right. Oh, this is the way in which we get more. This is the way in which you can be faster at it, or perform better at it, or make something more grandeur about it. It's also about, these are the mistakes we made. And I don't think we're very good at that. We're not very good at saying, okay, we're always good at showing what we've done well, I guess. And if you think about any leader, whether it be within within a research, within a political, within a sport, they're always wanting to see highlights about what they did well and not necessarily what they did wrong. But that's really what is important. Going back to that transparency and honesty is, yeah, we did this, we thought it was great, but actually it cost us a lot here. And so this is what we know. You need to focus on this and allowing the next generation to go, yeah, okay, based on what you've said and the experience, what we're going through, is where we need to target. We need to step aside and give them that opportunity as well. So I think about, and I don't know, it's hard to know where that age happens. To me, it's sort of when you start hitting 30. I think 30 is maybe around about that 30 mark, I think is where humans are probably at their most optimal, where they go through a period of growth through their childhood, teenage years, and now they've gone through a decade of being independence, but they're still physically fit. Their body is not degrading over time and they're well attuned to. So they've gone through that learning phase. Now they're at their, maybe call it fittest. And they're the people that I think could actually make some good decisions. But what we have to do is maybe step back as an older generation, allow that to occur. Because if you think about political parties these days, how old the politicians are, you only have to go back to what was the political thing with Facebook and all the rest of it, how disconnected those decision makers, or maybe maybe they played it on a little bit, but how disconnected they actually are about what the real world problems are occurring, and allowing that younger generation to identify them and having a crack at being able to resolve it.
To try and tie this all up, because there was something that you said in there that was perfect, I feel. Yet we as humans, biologically, we grow when we're young, then we get to this period around 25, 35, something like that, where it's like, okay, now it's sustainable. You're not degrading, you're not improving, but it's holding. And then after that, you start to decline. It's like that is the period of time where you are at your peak, where you can perform best. And I feel like one thing, like I said, it's taking longer and longer to get people up to speed. I think we're pushing into that period where you're at your peak and you should be performing at that. And so then for me, the role of the generation is, okay, before we get to that point, let's get them up to speed to allow them at their best, at their physical best, at their biological best, to be able to spend that time then taking what we've learned and building on it.
Yeah, I agree. And then the role of the older generation is just to be transparent and open, because they hold the experiences. But it's to be transparent and open, but also not to be controlling too. So like, okay, I know, because even now when I get to 40, I feel like, okay, it's only now that I really start to, and I'll probably feel that at 50. It's only now that I'm really starting to understand myself and the world around me. It's taken a while to really understand that. But then also understanding, okay, just because I know all of this and I've gone through that experience, I still might not be the best person to be able to actually make that happen. So it's being able to pass that knowledge on to someone else and say, okay, this is what we learned, this is what my generation learned, or this is what we went through that we found out, good and bad. And it's over to you guys. Like, make the best of it that you can, and having faith and trust in the a younger generation can actually make a better environment for themselves, I guess, is where the anxiety holds. And so we've got people in control, which from my point of view, that, politicians are, I guess, either approaching or are past their retirement age. So we consider someone that in this country, I think it's 65. That's the point at which their decline to actually contribute to work is at a point at which it's, I hate to say this, but it's not as valuable as other workers. So we consider that the retirement age, but then we've got people in control that are at that age. And so are they best fit for leading the future generations? They're not. It's really needs someone in that future generation to lead them, because that comes, whatever decisions they make, it's a cost to them. Someone that's 70, every decisions they make, it's like if they live 20 more years, great. Other than that, they don't really see past that. And there's something tangible about that. I'm 30. Whatever decisions I make means I have to live through them in retirement. And so I think that's a greater sacrifice to make.
From the perspective of roles, I feel like you start off, okay, your role from 0 to a certain point is to learn. Then your next role is to develop, innovate, create, take that ever, whatever. Then your role after that is to pass on the experiences that you've had. So learn from others' experiences, gain your own experiences, pass on those experiences to the next generation.
Yep. I couldn't say it better. I think that's really the role of each generation.
Okay,
Exactly.
happy to leave it there.
Yep.
All right then. My supplemental song suggestion for today is Macklemore's Growing Up, which is featuring Ed Sheeran. And then my quote for today is, "If I have seen further than other men, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants," by Sir Isaac Newton. Thanks for watching this discussion. We look forward to hearing your thoughts about the topic we just discussed. As always, be well.